Sue, who is trying to make whips, and we're going to work on heel knots today. So I'm going to show you some of the stuff that I'm using to get my heel knots done. So first off, some of the tools that I need. I use some long macrame style T-pins. I'm gonna need some athletic tape or hockey tape. I like to use cloth athletic tape. I need a Sharpie just for a little marking. Permalock needle. Doesn't really matter what size for this project. And some brads. I got these brass brads that I like to use. They don't rust or corrode or anything like that, so they're nice to use for this. And last item I use is a little bit of fabric glue. This, I suppose, is probably optional, but I like to use it. Now, Sue doesn't use square starts. She uses the knots and then has to lash it down and cut off the end. But the principle is going to be exactly the same. For the lashing, when I used to do it, to do my heel knot foundation, I don't want any waxed lashing on here, so I would use a nylon thread perhaps, or paracord guts, and that way the glue has something that it can stick to rather than the waxed, let's say, artificial sinew. So just as a little bit of safety, I'm going to put a garbage can underneath here. When I put the glue on, I just kind of slobber the glue on the end of the knot here, or on the end of the handle, and I don't want any drips to end up on my wood floor. So first off, I happen to know that I like my heel knot foundation is to be about 1.5 inches. So I'm going to mark that here so I have an idea how far I have to go. So I'm going to measure that 1.5 inches from the end, goes to right about there. I just need a little mark on the handle so that I can see how far to wrap. So this is just a random scrap of leftover paracord gutted that I have. I've fused the end here so that it's not going to come undone. And to get started, oh yeah, need those pliers too. I'm going to grab that, and I'm going to just anchor that with a brad so it doesn't go anywhere. Then I'm going to slap some glue on here so that foundation is not going to slip around on me too much. This glue is pretty runny. It's part of the reason I got the garbage can underneath to catch any drips. And then I'm just going to wrap this around, not particularly tight. Not like I'm pulling strands for the plating, until I get to my mark. Now to finish this off, I'm going to snip it, and I'm going to melt it. So just to kind of hold it in place for a moment, I give it a good moment with the heat, and then I'm going to press it into place with the side of my scissors so I don't burn my fingers. I'm going to stick another nail in here to help hold that. Alright. Now I'm going to put another layer on this, but I'm not going to cover the whole area of this. I'm going to bring it back a little bit so that'll give me a little bit of a tapered contour to the heel knot. So I'm just going to grab another scrap. And another brad. that's most of the foundation right there. Now, this is going to be an indie style whip, so I'm going to be putting a wrist strap on here yet as well, which is also going to bulk up the size of this a little bit more. Right now it's pretty small, but once I get the other strap on here and fill in alongside the strap, that's going to bulk this up a bit. Keep in mind also when I tie the knot over the top of that, that's going to add 2 more layers of paracord essentially, because as you tie the knot and it lays over the top of each other, you get another 2 thicknesses of knots. So it's going to end up being, you know, probably about that thick by the time it's done. All right, so I'm going to start the strap, the wrist strap for this whip now. For a full-size indie whip, I'd use a 6-strand flat, but I'm going to use a 5-strand for this one. Getting it started really is the only tricky part. After that, it's pretty easy. So I can take from either side. I'm going to go over, and then I'll take the 1 strand for the other side. I go over, and then over here I can see I need to go under over, and then I'll start over here. It looks like I need to go under over, and then I just keep repeating this on and on. These strands are about 2 feet long. It should give me about a 16-inch flat braid, which folded in half gives us enough room to put a hand through there. All right, so I've got my flat braid finished, and to help hold things in place until I get it lashed down on the heel knot, I'm just going to add a little super glue here. Just kind of get the spots where the strands overlap. So I got that end glued down, and I'm going to do the same thing on this end. Need to give that some time to dry. Okay, so my super glue has dried sufficiently. It's not completely dry, but close enough to continue on. I'm gonna have some waxed thread here. I'm gonna use this to bind the strap onto the heel knot, onto the foundation. So I'm just gonna get this started here. And then all I'm going to do is I'm just going to lay this in. I'm not worried about the fact that the strands are too long at the moment. I'm going to trim those off in a bit. And I get a wrap on one side before I worry about fixing the other side. I don't try to do them both at the same time. There's no need. Try to get it about straight and start lashing that down nice and tight. Alright, so now I'm just going to cut off the scraps here. Again, I want to have kind of a tapered finish to the knot. It's going to have kind of an acorn shape to it. So the bulk that this is adding is actually desirable. Cut that off close to the lash. And same thing on the other side. And then just so I don't have it in the way all the time, I'm gonna have it free. Melt those ends a little bit. Okay, so if you take a look at my knot right now, or my foundation, it is lopsided, which is expected right now. It's a little wider here where the foundation has been expanded by the wrist thong. it's a little narrower here than it is here. So to take care of that, I've created another flat braid, and that's actually going to cover the butt end here, and also provide the bulk to fill in the other space. So what I have here is a really small, a really short flat braid of 7 strands. Again, if I was doing a full-size India, it would have a bigger knot. I'd do this with more strands, but I don't need that for this small. This is only a 12 plate overlay on here, so it's kind of a small. All right, so I get that started again, just like before. I'll lay that in here. Again, just doing one side at a time. I don't need to do them both. Not really sure what kind of material this is, but it burns really hot, so I don't like pushing it down when it's melted. All right, and again, trim off my strands. And back a little bit. Right, I got a little strand there that's sticking up a bit. I'm gonna trim that back. Just try to make it kind of even height all the way around. Looks pretty good. All right, so we're gonna go downstairs and put some staples in this now. All right, so we're down in the basement and out in the garage actually, and we're going to put some staples in here to hold that heel knot foundation and make sure it doesn't slide. Also to staple down the wrist strap in case somebody gets a little crazy with a wrist strap. These staples are absolutely ancient. I have no clue whether or not they make this anymore, but I did measure these. These are just a little bit over a ½ inch long. So maybe they're like, I don't know, 5/8 maybe. And I like to use these long staples because they go all the way through the heel knot foundation and into what's underneath. So if I wasn't putting a wrist strap on this, I would probably just put maybe 6 staples in this thing, but I want to make sure that I really get some good attachment to that wrist strap. So I'm going to get at least 6 into there. And then just a few more lower down, like so. And that's just to help make sure that heel knot stays on there. Now, this does look like a rather lumpy staple. They kind of stand up and they're kind of uncomfortable to touch. So I do end up pounding them in a little bit more with a hammer. And for that, I just bring it over here to my anvil and tap on it a little bit more. At this time, I'll also maybe pound a little bit on pieces of the heel knot foundation that's sticking up a little bit more. Maybe I had a little bit too many layers of material. That feels much better. All right, we're done down here. All right, the last bit of getting this heel knot foundation ready is to wrap it with a little bit of athletic tape. So I don't want to get too high with the athletic tape because the heel knot might not cover it entirely. And mostly this is on here just as a bit of traction for the heel knot so it doesn't slide around. I found that if I don't put something under there, sometimes my heel knots will slide. It makes it a little bit easier to tie the heel knot also if the string's not sliding around too much. But this is just mostly for traction. You can see I got a little bit of foundation hanging out the bottom here, and I really don't care. That's going to be covered by the knot later on. Also the fabric tape helps protect against the staples poking through. All right, last bit of foundation work on this is to put a foundation for the transition knot. So for that, I'm just going to wrap some artificial sinew around it, right where that transition happens. The classic transition knot for an indie is actually very small and doesn't rise up very much either. So I'm just going to try to make this about 2 wraps wide and just build it up enough so that it'll be an anchor for the knot so the knot doesn't slide around later. I should have done this before I went and did staples because I got to go back down and staple this back on to make sure that my sinew doesn't slide around. So we're going to start tying some knots now. This is, I'm going to do the transition knot first. I have my cheater dowel here set up to do a 5x2, sorry, a 2x5. Numbers are never in the order I expect them to be. A 2x5 Turk's head knot. I already have my strand laced up here ready to go, and my needle. And I'll show you how this works. Alright, so I'm going to follow the lines. It's just important to notice these marks here that are telling me whether or not I'm supposed to go over or under the strand that might be there when I reach, when I get to the point where I'm crossing strands. So just follow the lines. And here I finally get to a point where I have a match where I'm gonna cross over, and in this particular case my lines show me that I go over, and again here's another one and my lines show that I go over, and here's another one, and again my lines go over, and I go over. Now I finally have one where I need to go under, so I'm going to feed this under here and make sure that I keep the strand flat. Trying to get rolls out of the strands when they're tied in a knot is really hard. So I'll kind of pull this out straight every now and then just to make sure that it's still running good. Here's another one. I got to go under and then over the next. Kind of like doing a checkerboard plate. You're always going. Your finished product, I should say, is always going to be over under. You're never going to have 2 overs in a row. So now that I've got back to my original starting spot, I am done with this knot. Technically, I've got a 1-pass 2x5 Turk's head knot. I am, however, going to put the second pass on here. Now, I usually don't do the second pass on the dowel, but I find that particularly for the very smaller knots, I really need to do it, otherwise they come undone as I try to put them onto the whip. So I'm actually going to go ahead and run through a whole nother set here just by following the strands that are already here, and I'm always going to follow on the bottom side. You could do it on the top, doesn't matter, just pick a side. I'm always going to follow on the bottom, right? So I go underneath the existing strand here, the running strand I think is the term they use for it, and I go over here under, and I'm just following those lines again. This time I have a strand that I'm actually following. Makes it a little bit easier. And I do exactly the same thing that the other strand does. This strand went under, so when I draw my second line through here, it goes under also. Alright, there we go. Got my 2 passes on here now. So I'm going to run my rubber band down off of here first. I've more than once forgot to move the rubber band, pulled all my pins, and then tried to slide the knot off. And with this one kind of anchored, it screws up the knot, pulls it tight in one weird place, and ends up being very difficult to fix. So I always do the rubber band first, pull out all my cotter pins, and then use my Turk's head knot, getting ready for the transition. All right, I'm going to take my needle off of here. Don't need that anymore. When I do the heel knot, I'll end up leaving that on there because it's going to be a multi-pass knot, and I'm going to need the needle to finish that on the heel foundation. But since I did both of my passes already, all I got to do now is tighten this thing down. Just to help hold things in place, I like to use the macrame T-pins, and I'm going to anchor one end into the thong here, so that's not going to slide around anymore. So now I've got a nice anchored spot. I can pull on the knot, and all I'm going to do now is I'm going to follow that strand all the way around and kind of hold it in place a little bit as I work around the knot and tighten things up. Maggie's coming up to help me. Hi, Maggie. There, all right, we're getting pretty close. So now it's getting tight where it'll actually stay on a little bit by itself. I got to tighten it down a lot more. But I got a lot of the slack out of it. So now I can get to the point where I'm going to start using a fid to help pull things. And let me adjust this a little bit more down to my lap here. All right. So again, I'm just going to work my way around, following that one strand, all right, which happens to be this guy right here. So I'm using the fid to get underneath here and pull that tight. You gotta be careful. This particular fid that I'm using is very pointy, and it will pull strands of the paracord and kind of snag at the paracord. So you gotta be careful when you're doing this that you don't create any fuzzies. So I've got that down, stuck down pretty nice and tight. I'm going to snip off my loose ends as close to the knots or as close to the other pass as I can get. And you can see just a little bit of fuzz there, a little bit of fuzz there, and I'm going to hit those with a lighter. Using this lighter outside because I cannot see the flame. It is like invisible out here in the outdoor light. All right, transition knot. Just like a regular whip part, any whip part, I'm going to need to do a roll on this. And I usually just roll it with my hand on a tabletop. So So I'm just going to roll that a little bit there, help flatten it out, smooth it out a little bit. And there you go. There's our transition knot. All right, so heel knot is next. All right, so now we're going to be doing the heel knot. I've got a strand here. It's about 7 feet long. It's probably too long for the knot that I'm trying to tie. I'm not using small indies because it's a much smaller diameter than what my usual bullwhips are. I probably don't need that full length, but that's what we're going to use. All right, so I'm going to melt the end of this a little bit. While that is still hot, I'm going to thread on my needle. All right, and then I'm going to set up my mandrel for a 6x5. So that's, for myself at least, the magic number that heel knots in the foundation size that I like to do. That's the magic size for my heel knots. Usually ends up being a 3-pass that way. This is maybe only going to be a 2-pass because of the foundation being so much smaller. But we'll see what happens. I wish there was some magic way of knowing what size knot would go on a foundation. And there's probably some math that people have worked out that would show them that, but I don't know it. So it ends up being a lot of hit and miss. There are times when I have retied heel knots 4 or 5 times before I got the setting that I really liked. And there we go. I have completed that knot on the mandrel. So once again, take the rubber band off, pull out all the pins. And I'm going to put that on the whip. This time I'm leaving the Permalock needle on because we're going to need that to finish the rest of the knot, to do the multi-passes that I'm going to be needing later. Alright, so now once again I'm going to use my T-pin, alright, to tack down that starting strand, and then I am going to kind of spread this knot out and try to get all my little squares about as even as I can. I'm going to pull this a little tighter, but I'm not trying to make it tight yet. If you make it tight now, it's going to be really hard to get your other passes in. So all I'm doing is just taking out slack here. I'm really not trying to tighten things. Just taking out the slack. Alright, so now, again, trying to get the squares about as even, moving around this as I can. I like to, because I'm planning on a 3-pass here, I like to run one of my extra passes above the strand that I'm following, and the other strand below. That way I get a little bit extra coverage on top of my knot, as well as a little extra coverage on the bottom of the knot. And it doesn't matter what order I do this in at all. So I'm going to follow the strand that started my knot, this guy right here, and follow that around the knot. All right, this time I'm following on the bottom side. And once again, I'm not going to worry too much about doing them one at a time. I'll pull 2 or 3 through and just use my finger to kind of hold that up there in place where it belongs. Again, if I pull things too tight, things will slide around into positions that I don't want them. All right, working my way back down, I'm still following this strand right here, so I go over, under, and over and under. Now I'm a little worried my strand length isn't long enough for this. So I'm definitely running out of string here. Got a couple of possible ways of dealing with that. The first one is to go through and tighten things down. That makes it a little easier. It gives me a little more slack to work with. But if I tighten things down, it makes it much more difficult to work my needle through everything. And I can see I've got to run around my knot 2 more times yet, and that's not going to make it around the knot 2 more times. So I'm going to abandon this strand here, and I'm going to go cut myself another strand. All right, so I am guessing that I mismeasured my first strand. I've got another 2 feet here, which is too much, but it'll get the job done. So this is the strand that I was pulling through before that I ran out of, and I've got options for how to deal with this, but the easiest one is simply to start this strand inside here, because this is supposed to be running up here next, right? It's supposed to follow on top of this strand. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed this in here. So I'm going to feed that down here and basically take over what that other strand was doing. All right, the danger is that I'm going to pull on this too hard and end up pulling it out. Now, I'm going to use my pin again and stick it in up here now, just to make sure that doesn't get pulled on too hard. This strand down here, which was the start of my Turk's head, doesn't really matter anymore. It's not going to get pulled on in such a way that I have to worry about it coming out or coming undone or getting wiggled around too much. Anyway, so here I am, and I was following on top. So we're going here. Right here, and we're done. So yeah, I didn't need anywhere near one of the second strands I grabbed. All right, so I do have a little bit of tape sticking out up here, but massaging the knot a little bit, pushing it up towards the heel end should get that covered. All right, so now I have to work my way around the heel knot, just like I did the transition knot, and pull that nice and tight. Again, I'm not pulling it as tight as I can. I'm just trying to snug things down so they stay in place. In this particular case, I got 2 strands I got to worry about, so I do need to be a little bit careful, but it's the same old process. All right, so I got everything tightened down. Now I just got to cut off my scraps. Just like when I was doing the transition knot, I'm going to try to pull these things kind of tight and snip them off as close to the overlaying strand as I can get. And I'll touch everything a little bit with some fire to make sure that it doesn't fray. This was the starting strand of my second, and it passes right here. I'm going to pull that tight and snip it right there. Okay, so I just got to touch these things with fire. Once again, I can't see my flame out here in the sunlight, so I'm kind of just working this kind of blindly, just looking to see things melt, which isn't the best way of doing it, but it'll do. All right, I think that's done. I just got to roll it now. All right, there it is, completed knot. You can see things are bunched up down here at the bottom. That's kind of expected because the knot or the foundation is smaller here than it is out on the end. Out here on the end, you can see the strands are looking really nice out there. Until you start doing something like some pineapple knots or some interweaves, you're always going to have these bunched up piles. I don't know that I would say it's marring the appearance, but it does make it look a little bit more rustic, maybe. How about?